South Africa is lurching from crisis to crisis, mostly because of the economic situation. Here we are with Dawie Roodt, chief economist at the Efficient Group. Tariffs is now becoming a huge thing in the world. I think a lot of people had sort of a superficial understanding of tariffs. Trump has now introduced it as a very, very mainstream thing. As a libertarian, it'd be interesting to hear your opinion on Trump's now tariff war in quotation marks. And do you think there's any validity to it? Because his argument is, okay, we need to take on China. This is the best way to do it.
Yeah, this tariff thing is a big thing in the world, and I think like anything else, it's not a black-white kind of thing. There's a middle ground somewhere here, and I think we need to understand. And Donald Trump is right in a certain sense. But let's just go back and understand. Let's understand what tariffs are, and I'm totally against tariffs. Tariffs basically is an import tax on goods or services from another country. So you import something from another country and you levy a tariff on that. We have in South Africa many tariffs. It's highly complicated. In fact, if you want to import somebody, you need to get an import agent because it's a nightmare to import stuff in South Africa. And the same goes with most countries in the world. It's complicated to trade with other countries in the world. And it is because of, amongst others, because of the various tariffs. It's difficult to find out what tariff is applicable on another tariff. If you are in favor of tariffs, then you have to put the same tariff on everything. Do not discriminate.
Why?
Because the moment you charge various different tariffs for different things, you distort the economy. You distort the allocation process in the economy. So, for example, if you decide, and this is a very good example actually, if you decide to put a charge on cigarettes, we call it the sin tax in South Africa. And the reason why we do that is we want to encourage people to smoke less. But in the process, the state gets some money. That is wrong. Because cigarettes got this charge, the sin tax on it, but milk not. Which means then, in a very crude sense, people will drink more milk and smoke a little bit less. Which is wrong. And it is wrong because people should be allowed to make their own decisions. It's not the role of politicians to tell me I should drink more milk and smoke less. That's my business. This is a bit of an extreme example. What it comes down to is that you undermine the allocation process of scarce resources in the economy. And the allocations of scarce resources in the economy should be a function of normal supply and demand that are not disrupted by some sort of tariff or some sort of tax somewhere. So that's the bottom line. So if you want to have a tariff, the same tariff for everything. And yes, countries use tariffs all the time. And the main argument why countries use tariffs is because I want to zap a tariff on some sort of industry because of some sort of product, because I want to protect my own industry. We have high tariffs in South Africa. We've got tariffs that protect the local motor car industry. But after many, many years of this protection of our local motor car industry, they still cannot stand on their own two legs. And we're still paying much more for motor cars in South Africa than for other countries. So don't think for one single moment that the protection argument is a valid argument, because South Africa is a good example where it's not a good argument. In fact, what happens the moment you start protecting a local industry, then that industry becomes big and fat and lazy. And that's like a motor car industry in South Africa. But if you look at the United States, and maybe before I come back to tariffs, just a bit of background. The US economy is the biggest economy in the world. The US economy is also the consumer of last instance. And what I mean by that is that everybody wants to get into the American consumer market because it's the biggest market in the world. You can sell a lot of things there. And that's, by the way, part of the reason why we saw this Chinese miracle the last couple of decades, because they started selling to the Americans. And Americans opened up their market. And many countries in the world, including South Africa, get huge benefits because we export to the United States. So Donald Trump's got a point here in arguing that he's the buyer of everything, but nobody wants to buy from him. And that's his comment. And there is some truth in that. But one also has to say that there's a reason why we all sell to the Americans. Because the American, and there are many reasons that they are big, but also because the American dollar is the world's most important reserve currency. So what happens? Because the US dollar is the world's most important reserve currency, many countries, including South Africa, most countries, like to keep US dollars as part of their official reserves. We take the dollars, we export stuff to the United States, the dollars come to South Africa, and the dollars eventually end up with the South African Reserve Bank. But that also means that the US dollar is stronger than what it would have been otherwise. And that means that the US consumer can consume more than would have been the case otherwise. So this puts them in this astonishingly beneficial position where they can maintain a living standard higher than would have been the case if the US dollar was not the world's most important reserve currency. So although the Americans are the big buyers in the world, they are being paid for that. And they are being paid for that because the dollar is the world's most important reserve currency. Come back to Donald Trump. So he says, and there's some truth in this, I want a more balanced trade between America and the other countries in the world, but he's only looking at physical imports and exports, mostly. Some other stuff as well, but mostly physical imports and exports. Recently he started looking at movies as well, which is not as a non-physical import and export. It's more of a service. But he's only looking at things like TVs and computers and cell phones and motor cars and stuff like that. And he wants a balanced trade between the United States and other countries. It is wrong for a number of reasons. One is that you can't just exclude services or non-physical imports and exports. You have to include that as well. And the United States exports a lot of things. For example, Googling is an export of the US. The movies that the United States export that we watch are exports of the United States. Facebook is an export of the United States, and many other examples. And if you include all of those sort of non-physical imports and exports as well, then that deficit between the US, then the picture changes completely. Then the US is not the massive consumer that Donald Trump portrays it to be. It's a much more balanced trade between the United States and the rest of the world. That is important to understand.
Is there a way that you can quantify that he can understand that?
Yes, there are ways of quantifying that. There are ways of looking at, for example, the current account deficits between the US and the rest of the world. Then you will see it's much more balanced. What Donald Trump is doing is looking at the trade deficit. And the trade deficit is physical imports and exports. So you have to look at everything. So he's got a point in a way, but he's also missing some other stuff. Also what is important is that, he's got this huge thing about bringing factories back to the United States. Nobody wants to, or very few people want to work in factories. They want to work as white-collar workers in the US. And that is where the US economy has been performing much better than where it is actually performing, and that's in the service part of the economy. And primary and secondary industries are becoming less important. Not more important, less important. It doesn't make sense to move all the factories from Vietnam back to the United States and think the US workers are going to go into start working in factories, because people don't work in factories anymore. Anyway, it's robots working in factories and artificial intelligence and stuff like that. So he's missing that point, that the fulcrum of economic growth is not happening in factories anymore. It's happening somewhere else. It's happening in service industry, and that nobody wants to work in factories in any event. So it's wrong on various levels. Philosophically, it's wrong. The calculations are wrong. So the tariffs are wrong. The emphasis and the understanding of tariffs and the role of tariffs are all wrong. Not only Donald Trump, politicians as a rule. And the best case scenario will be to have no tariffs whatsoever between all countries, and the countries that can do certain things better will start doing that, and other countries will concentrate on whatever they can do better. So why is he doing this? Donald Trump. He's been zapping everybody with the tariff, and then cancelling again and halving the tariff and postponing the tariff. It's a bit of a mess. Nobody really knows what's going on. And the only reason why I can think why he's doing that is because he wants to use this as a negotiation tool. He wants to use this as a tool to get somebody to make a deal. He wants to make deals. Because Donald Trump is not an ideologue. He doesn't believe in anything. He's not a free marketeer like me and you. He's not a socialist or a communist or a capitalist or anything. He is a deal maker. He's a businessman, and he's looking for a deal. And he will make a deal with anybody, as long as he thinks he's making a good deal for the American people. And that is what makes America great again, but in his mind, what it means. So it is not about the tariffs, I think. I think the tariffs is just an instrument that he uses to force people to come to the negotiation table because he wants to make a deal. So if he wants to make a deal, come, let's make a deal. But let's hope in the end that we will have fewer tariffs.
And his argument that China should be taken on, that they're floating and violating trade agreements, or...
Yeah, no, without a doubt, Donald Trump's got a point there about looking at the Chinese. What happened in China the past 30 years is nothing less than a miracle in terms of economic development. They did absolutely amazingly well. And part of the reason why they did so well is because they got access to the Western world, especially the US market. They started exporting to the United States. But there are some other reasons as well. They are actively protecting many of their own local industries. And that's part of the reason why many of their local industries really grew at an amazing rate. The motor car industry is a very good example. And even highly technologically driven industries, they are also becoming very, very good at. But that's behind a wall of protection, behind a wall of tariffs quite often, but not only tariffs, non-tariff kind of protection, like subsidies to certain industries. So many industries get subsidies and they are protected from competition from other countries in the world. So Donald Trump, without a doubt, he's got the point there. But then South Africa is also guilty with that. And the motor industry comes to mind again. And recently we wanted to take the Americans on when it comes to poultry. And we lost that war because the Americans are just, and the Brazilians are just better than us to growing chickens. So that's better for the consumer need. I think the answer to these kind of questions must always be, or the question that should be asked must always be, what will be the best for the consumer?
Yeah, and people forget about that. They always talk about the worker, but no one talks about the consumer.
What will be the best for the consumer? Now, look at motor cars in South Africa. It is not good for me. Because if I want to buy a motor car in South Africa, I sometimes have to pay double what it costs in New Zealand, for instance. So it's not good for me. Is it good for me to have an import tariff on chicken? The answer is no, because that means my chicken price will go up as the consumer. So, and if certain industries are protected, why not other industries? Why can't the financial industry be protected? Because I work in that industry. Why must I compete with somebody else? No, I also want some protection. So no protection. And the Chinese certainly protected many industries. But let's not take away from his success from the Chinese. Deng Xiaoping started this in 1979 when he said, it doesn't matter what the color of the cat is, as long as it catches the mouse. And basically what he did, he opened up the market for private enterprise and even private property rights in China. And that was the start of this astonishing economic growth that we experience in China. But certainly, the state also got involved in protecting certain industry, and that certainly helped the economic growth in China as well. Donald Trump, to an extent, is right there as well.
Dawie, I hear you've got now into a kerfuffle with the entire university story. Do you want to give some context there? I think you said that university degrees, on average, are not worth as much as people think they are, especially BA degrees. But
actually, it's a broader comment, a few comments that I made about skills development in South Africa. And now we call it education. I think that's the wrong word. We have to change the word to skills development. And the emphasis must be on skills and not on some sort of qualification, because that is unfortunately what we do in South Africa. We chase pieces of paper, but we don't necessarily chase skills. And the reason why I had comments about the skills development system in South Africa is because after the most recent release of the unemployment data in South Africa. Now, if you look at the unemployment data in South Africa, we all know that those are absolutely horrible numbers. And the numbers, as we know, we've got unemployment levels on an expanded definition of 43%. And if you look, even amongst graduates unemployment level is something like 12 or 13%. Obviously, it's much lower than the rest, but chance, if you get some sort of qualification, you're always better off than somebody without any qualification. But still, if you talk about double figures unemployment numbers amongst graduates, that really begs the question about why is that? I mean, they're not supposed to be unemployed whatsoever because they're skilled people. But before I get to the education part, perhaps just a comment about where the South African economy is growing. And South Africa is not an exception. It grows pretty much, well, in fact, there's a lack of economic growth. But if there is some economic growth, the South African economy typically grows at a certain part, and like the rest of the world. And a very good example is what's happening in the rich world. The rich world primarily producers, or they produce mostly, or the production side of the economy, or production in the economy is centered around skills and special kinds of skills and skills that are sharpened up all the time. You can't get a qualification and think it's done. You need to continuously learn. And it happens in the tertiary industry, and it happens in the service kind of industry, and that's the industry that is pretty much driven by technological changes. And the same in South Africa. We don't have much economic growth, but every now and again there's a bit of an economic growth, and economic growth mostly happens in that part of the economy, the skills-driven part of the economy. So coming back to the kind of qualifications that we have in South Africa, we have a lot of private sector. Well, we've got approximately 20 public universities and something like 120, 130 private higher education institutions. Now, if you look at the private higher education institutions, remember they are for profit. So they produce something that they can sell. And people are not going to buy from them if they don't think it's worth the money that you're paying for that. And many of these private, not all of them, I just have to add, but many of these private universities produce some of their students, or not only universities, some other higher institutions as well, but some of their students get a job before they finish their qualifications. They are very much sought after.
Yeah.
And it's simply because of market forces. Market forces are just telling them, listen, if you want to produce something that somebody wants to buy, then you have to produce something of quality at the right price. And that's what the private sector is doing, and more so. If you compare that to the public sector, not only universities, but the whole education system in South Africa, and this is where the emphasis, and people don't talk enough about this, the emphasis should be on world-class primary education. Because our kids can't read and write. So that's where you need to start. You have to create a world-class primary education system, and ours suck, to say the least. We spend a lot of money on primary education, relatively and absolutely, and the quality of our primary education is really bad. It's sometimes the worst in the world. And the result of that is that we pass on these kids that are just not prepared for university. We sort of dump them on the universities and think that universities must somehow make them ready for university. Yeah. So that is unfair to the universities to start off with. But it's also wrong because everybody wants to have a degree. And if you look at the rich world, everybody doesn't have a degree. In fact, people realize that the very rich people on this planet are people without university degrees.
Elon Musk has
gone on, and many other examples.
Yeah.
So skills, that's the thing that really matters. Nothing wrong with having a degree. And of course, we should have universities, and we should have top-notch universities. But I think we have too many universities. And they produce a kind of product that the market simply do not want. And the market, things like, for example, certain humanities. If you produce somebody with a BA degree in political science, for example, who wants to employ a person like that? It doesn't mean it's not worth something. It is worth something. I would rather employ somebody like that than somebody with only grade 8 qualifications, for example. But the reality is that is not what the economy really needs. The economy needs highly skills, very special kind of skills that is driven around new technological changes. So how should we change that? I think there should be far fewer public universities. And the money that should rather be channeled to primary education, get world-class primary education, and turn many of the public universities in technical colleges, for example. We need more teachers. And a teacher's college, for example, or some of these many technological tech stuff that we need that we simply do not produce in South Africa. So turn a lot of them, probably half of the universities or even more, into tech kind of colleges. Then what we also have to do, we have to encourage the private sector by means of paying them, like we pay universities if they produce certain research. Why can't we encourage the private universities to produce the research? Because they're lacking as far as the research is concerned. So we need to, I think, pay the private universities if they also, exactly the same as public universities, if they produce research, pay them for that. And that will actually encourage even higher quality amongst the private universities. So that's what we need to do. And then, of course, the emphasis must be to produce the necessary skills that the economy actually needs. And that's my comments that I made. And of course, everybody's coming down on me like a ton of bricks.
Well, they've probably got a vested interest.
Of course they have a vested interest. A university where I hold 2 degrees from is University of South Africa, the biggest UNISA, the biggest university in South Africa. I'm very, very proud of my degrees. I worked very hard to get those degrees. It was a time when UNISA was very, very well run. Today, UNISA is a mess, because of mismanagement and all sort of other allegations about what's going on at UNISA. So, and it is because of 2 reasons, and it is because of the appointment of politically connected individuals that do not have the skills, and simply mismanagement and corruption. And not only UNISA, many of the other universities as well. They are state institutions that are badly run, like many other state institutions. They're supposed to be kind of independent, and they are kind of independent, but certainly not independent enough. And like I've said, I think many people are appointed there because of political affiliation, not because of competence. Then, if you look, for example, at the unemployment numbers in South Africa, we can clearly see that there is that the part of the economy that is growing is that technological part of the economy, but the rest of the economy is simply lagging behind. So a lot of criticism against me because of this comments, but I think I've got a valid arguments why I say what I've said.
So to summarize, you're not saying, okay, soldiers should come to the university and kick everyone out. Just say, if you're so good, you should survive on your own. No more state funding or whatever.
I'm not necessarily against state funding for universities because I think there's certainly room for things like philosophy, for instance. I don't think necessarily that if you've got a degree in philosophy, you're going to find a job. But that is the basis of universities. So yes, the state can fund some of these universities, not all 20. That's just too many. Everybody shouldn't be going to university. We should sort of limit it to maybe 10, maybe 15% of the population, because that is roughly where the world is. Everybody is not going to university. You don't need. And in fact, what we have a shortage of is these tech kind of stuff. We need to teach our kids to program and kids to be drone engineers and stuff like that. We've got a shortage in that. And it keeps on changing all the time. Don't think you've got a qualification in drone engineership and you're going to stop learning. You have to make sure that you stay on top of the most recent technology. It keeps on changing. And the emphasis, unfortunately, is not there in South Africa.
Dawie, seems like we've now made an agreement in terms of the budget. What do you think of this constant fight between the parties? And do you think there's going to be some sort of, I don't know, synergy or just people calming down and the budget passing that's actually beneficial to the South Africa?
If I look at our political leadership the last 2-3 months around the budget, the whole budgetary process, I am very disappointed. I think they look like a bunch of children. It looks like a kindergarten. They are so immature. Not all of them, but the majority of our political parties. I mean, I can't believe the things they said and the things they did. So and the best of all for me is that, it all centered around VAT, value added tax, whether we're going to have a 2%, 0.5%, nothing, whatever. And everybody complained and fighting and so on. Well, the DA was really disappointing at the beginning of the so-called government of national unity, because clearly the ANC completely dominated the DA, then DA had no voice, and they simply went along with everything that the ANC did. But when they heard about this 2% VAT increase that the Minister of Finance is going to propose, they realized that's going to be highly unpopular, and this was an opportunity for them to really make the mark and to find their own voice. And that's what they did, and they did a very good job on that. And two political parties actually came out on top here. And the one is the DA, because they took the legal route, and also the EFF. Those two political parties came on top. The political party that was by far the biggest loser here is the ANC. And this was a lose-lose for the ANC, because if they succeeded in increasing VAT, it would have been an ANC that increased VAT. And if they did not succeed in increasing VAT, then they lost to the DA, and that's exactly what happened. So this was a lose-lose for the ANC. They must advise them to do this. I don't know.
And I think you said they didn't even need to do that. They sort of overcalculated or something like that.
Yeah, there are many reasons why. In fact, personally, I'm very much in favor of a VAT increase, provided we reduce some other more damaging taxes. So the tax regime in South Africa needs to be redone in any event. But coming back to VAT only, I'm against the VAT increase because the politicians are spending too much money. They must spend less. And the only way you can get a politician to spend less money is to give them less money. If you give them more money, they're going to spend it and more. That's a reality. And that's happened in South Africa. And in fact, they spend the money and then they want to borrow even more money. And that's why I'm also against giving more money to SARS. I don't want a more efficient SARS. I want a SARS that's less efficient, because if they're more efficient, they're going to take more money out of the private sector's hands and give it to the state that wastes the money. Of course, we all have to pay our dues. But if you look at the current tax system in South Africa, it's highly unequal and it's highly unfair, the tax system in South Africa. So coming back to the VAT thing, and the best part of me for all of this, so VAT was not increased. They decided they're not going to increase VAT. And all the political parties are trying to take the credit for this. What is it? One South Africa thing of Musimo money. It's they take the credit for this. Action South Africa.
Yeah.
They want to take the, and all these other rats and mice. And even the ANC wants to take the credit. But the reality is they all supported that. They are lying. They're acting. They think we are stupid. We can't see this. But they all voted in favor of this. So don't try to pretend that you're safe from South Africa from a VAT increase. So what's going to happen now? Two things will happen that I'm very sure of. One thing is that VAT will not be increased. And I'll come back to some of these figures. But VAT will not be increased. The second thing is the Minister of Finance and the leader of the DA will come to some agreement before the budget is tabled. Because if you go to Parliament and you table a budget and the DA it votes against that again, then I don't know. Then
and you're wasting money.
Then you're wasting money. Then I mean, this is going to be an even bigger disaster. We've got two missed attempts or failed attempts. A third one the markets are just not going to be happy about that. And this will be the end, I believe, of the government of national unity as well and so on. So I'm pretty sure of those two things. They will make a deal before that time and VAT will not be increased. But what will a 0.5% VAT increase would have given us in any event? A 0.5%, according to the Minister of Finance, a 0.5% increase will give him 13.5 billion rand extra per year. I don't think so. Because of a weak economy, weak demand, I think 10 billion perhaps per year. But it doesn't really matter. It comes down to approximately, say, 1 billion rand per month. So it will give the Minister of Finance, which is a lot of money, don't make a mistake. But let me give you some other numbers. The total outstanding debt of the state. Okay, let me repeat again. So a 0.5% VAT increase will give the Minister of Finance approximately 1 billion rand extra a month. The total outstanding debt of the Minister of Finance of the state is 5,600 billion rand. The balances in the bank of the Minister of Finance, it fluctuates, but it's roughly about 200 billion rand. The balances in the bank at the tax and loan accounts and at the exchequer account. There's another account called the Gold and Foreign Exchange Contingency Reserve account. That account's balance at the moment is approximately 350, 400 billion rand or so. It fluctuates by between 20 and 40 billion rand per month. And they're bringing this country down for 1 billion rand a month. Last year, they collected approximately 8 or 9 billion rand more than what they planned to collect last year, the previous year. So they started off this year with a surplus of already 8 billion rand. And they want to bring the country down for 1 billion rand per month. Yeah. It's immature. It is political grandstanding. Yeah. I can't believe we've got quality political leaders like that. I think the Minister of Finance must be fired. He must resign. Just after, not now, just wait for the budget. But he must, but he must be, I mean, there's no way you can keep somebody on like this. I think there should be a general election. Of course, we can't have it.
Yeah, the ANC has to agree to that.
But that's what we should have. There should be a motion of no confidence in this amateurish government that we have. I can't believe the way that they managed this whole thing. Anyway, so 0.5% VAT increase was not about the money. It's about politics. It's because the ANC wants to show the DA what they can do, and the DA wants to show the ANC what they can do. It's about politics, and it's about bad politics.
So I recently made a video where I implore people to say something good essay. It's sort of the algorithm feeds negativity, and I understand your job. You have to give the bad numbers, as it were, and give the real analysis. But would you say something good?
Oh, there's plenty good going on in South Africa. Let me give you some very good news stories in South Africa. I think the Reserve Bank is a good news story. It's a very good news story. Because you can look at inflation currently in South Africa at around about 3%, below 3% actually. And that is because the Reserve Bank has been running a very tight ship for many years, which means monetary policy is very restrictive in South Africa, which means interest rates are relatively high, which is the case. Interest rates are high, too high, in fact. And I think the Reserve Bank will agree with that. But we don't have much of a choice here because the rest of the economy especially the fiscal side and the state-owned enterprises, they are being very, very badly run. So you need somebody to sort of balance out all these bad things that's happening in the economy, and the Reserve Bank is certainly doing that. So there's a lot of dry ammunition at the Reserve Bank. There's no dry ammunition at the fiscal accounts, for example. So that is a good news story, and a very good news story. I just said that I think political leaders are mostly a bunch of amateurs and they act like a bunch of children. There are not many countries in the world where I can say that. And that's another good thing about South Africa, the press, what you guys are doing. So that we can say and we can analyze and we can really take on the politicians and the president, which I think is a very weak president, by the way. We can take them on and we can say that in public. We've got the right to do that. We've become accustomed to it. We take it as normal, and it should be normal. But that is something that not all countries in the world have. And that's something that's good about South Africa as well. Something else that's good about the ANC, by the way, and they've done horrible damage to this country, but give credit where it's due. And just after the elections, after they've lost big time, the ANC, they accepted the results of the election. That's a very good thing. That's a very special thing. Because that means South Africa is becoming a mature democracy. That's also a good thing. And if you look even at the judiciary in South Africa, the judiciary is really deteriorating very quickly, especially the lower courts. But the constitution, the Chief Justice that we've had, not all of them, but the previous one and the current Chief Justice, Justice Maya, Justice Zondo, I've got very high regard of them. And also, if there's a case and they find against the state, not always, but generally the state abides by that. So we've got a country that is ruled by the rule of law, which is a good thing as well. And we have to keep it like that. So those are some good things. And I think the most important part about South Africa is that I think South Africans have shown themselves to be resilient and that they can make the necessary changes when the day comes. And I think the day is coming where we're going to kick out the ANC. And that's something that we have to do because it's a bad force. It's a destructive force. And I'm pretty sure that we are gradually in the process of kicking them out. And that is the biggest positive of being part of South Africa.